dirty little secret about the Traveler's Gift is I couldn't get it published. You know, and I'm not saying that 10 or 12 publishers turned me down. For 3.5 years, 51 publishers said that what I had written was not worth putting on paper.
Hey, teammates, welcome to another episode of It's All About the Team. And this is like an all-star day on It's All About the Team. We are so blessed to have one of the greatest authors, teachers, team builders, people in the world, my dear friend Andy Andrews. Welcome.
But I always had the ability to take a bad situation and make it worse. And I did. And ended up literally homeless.
Don't get mesmerized by the resume. You must be convinced of what they will bring to your culture.
If you prove value in what you're doing, you'll never be without work. You'll have too much work.
You can't fake culture. It has to be true culture. True culture wins all the time.
Jim Tressel is the one coach that I have ever worked with that could have done anything. Thank you, buddy. I am honored to be here.
Well, I tell you what, I'm so excited, and I was looking through all my stuff, and you know, I've got all my Andy Andrews books here and so forth, and I was thinking, and I've read this in your book too, that how important intentional reading is. And I thought back to the lessons I'd learned from people about you are who you hang around and you become what you read and so forth.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about my Mount Rushmore of coaches that I studied from yesteryear. And on my Mount Rushmore of coaches is my dad, who was Hall of Fame small college coach. It was John Wooden. You know, I read everything he ever wrote, and I got to meet him once, which was, you know, a heck of a thrill. Tom Landry was a guy that just, I read everything he did, and I got to meet him one time. And Bill Walsh, who, Mr. DeBartolo, who was from Youngstown, used to let us go out and study. We would just like sit there in awe. And so that's my Mount Rushmore of coaches that I studied. And there's a lot of great current ones. Those are from my youth, I should say. But my Mount Rushmore of people that I read that have really crafted what I believe and what I think, and you always remind us, you know, don't always think, you know, what you're thinking is right. But this has certainly crafted my thinking. I'll kind of go in chronological order. When I was youngest, it was Norman Vincent Peale.
Right.
Because my first head coach, Jim Denniston, he was the positive mental attitude guy, and we had to read everything that Norman Vincent Peale ever wrote. And then it became Zig Ziglar, because Zig, I got to see in 1977 when I was a third-year coach at the University of Akron, and Coach Denniston took us to a rally to watch Zig Ziglar. So then, of course, I read everything Zig Ziglar had. Then it became John Maxwell, Ohio boy. Got to meet him back in the 90s and so forth, and he would spend time with us at Ohio State in the early 2000s. And then my fourth Mount Rushmore is on the screen today, Andy Andrews.
Wow.
And it started with the Traveler's Gift, and you coming up to visit with our team. In fact, I even found the notes from when you were coming up, and our guys first talked through the book before you were able to come up and visit with them, and then my second favorite probably is Heartbender. Just all of us have different favorites, but to me, this might have been one of your most fascinating books. And then my third one is the one where Bottom of the Pool, where we've got to go to different places, go where the other people aren't, don't stay in the surface and all those things. But I've got them all. I've got Jones, I've got Young Traveler's Gift, I've got Noticer, I've got them all. And so what I would love for you to do is kind of start from the beginning, because we always ask our guests, the first team and the first group of people you're around is when you're young. And they give you your first lessons on being a good teammate and becoming the best you can be and all those things. So if you could help our listeners, I'm done gabbing, if you could help all your listeners all of our listeners know where Andy Andrews came from and how this unbelievable career began.
Well, I had a pretty normal childhood, and then when I was 19, the world fell in. My parents both died when I was 19. My mom died of cancer. My dad was killed in a car accident. And so crazy time, as you can imagine. But I've always had the ability to take a bad situation and make it worse. And I did. I made some bad moves and ended up literally homeless before that was even a word. Nobody was talking about homeless people 35 years ago. That wasn't even a term anybody used. But I was sleeping under a pier on the Gulf Coast and in and out of people's garages, which is not safe or smart, but I did. And I ran into this old guy back then one night under my pier, scared me to death. And he was an old man. His name was Jones. We didn't call him Mr. Jones. We just called him Jones. And we didn't really know where he was from. He would come in and out of town. We didn't know where he stayed when he was in town. Didn't know where he went when he left. Didn't know what was in the suitcase he carried around. But he called himself a noticer. He said, when God was passing out the talents, I didn't get any of the cool ones. I can't run fast. I can't sing great. But I notice little things that make a difference in people's lives. So he was my first real mentor, I suppose. He was the guy who told me tough things about myself, told me the truth about myself, and he got me started reading. I had always been kind of a Sports Illustrated, Field and Stream kind of person, but he got me started reading biographies, and I read over 200 of them during that time. Obviously, not a lot to do when you're under a pier, but I began to form a graph in my mind at that point on these people because I began to notice things they had in common. And I eventually formed it into 7 things that they all had. And I called them things, Jim. I didn't really know what to call them then. I knew they weren't theories. I knew they weren't ideas. Turns out they were principles. And so as I studied these principles, a couple of things hit me about them. One is that principles always work. That's something how many times do you have something in your life that always works? And principles always work. And they work whether you know them or not. Right? I mean, the principle of gravity was working long before the apple ever fell on Newton's head. But once it did, and once he understood it, we as a society were free to harness that principle to create an airline flight and suspension bridges and any number of things. The principle of gravity holds sway over. But the other thing that I noticed is with those 200 plus biographies that I read, I couldn't find anybody where I could see all 7 of those things in their lives. I couldn't find anybody that I thought knew they had all 7. It was like they were really aware of 2 or 3 of them, and they would harness those 2 or 3. Now, with the passage of time, we can see all 7, but it made me think, what happens to somebody who knows all 7? What happens to the kid whose parents know all 7 and begin to put those principles in that child's life? What happens to a company that harnesses all 7 of these things? And so those are the 7 things that I used to start yanking myself out from under the pier. And years later, they became the 7 decisions that I used in the story, The Traveler's Gift. And so that old man really, he kind of started me off. And the teams that I was building at first were, I guess, desperation teams. Yeah. I was looking, at this point, I'm looking for anybody who will get on my wagon. Yep. And so there were people coming and going. And I really had to work a while to prove the value of what I was learning. I told a lady earlier this morning, I was over at a PBS station, and she said, our funding and blah, 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 blah. And she said, we're having to raise $1.5 million. And I said, for the year? She said, yes, for the year. And I said, well, let me tell you how to do it. And she said, oh, okay. I said, here's what you do. You got to look at what you got, look at the people you got, look at what you're doing, and figure out how to bring value to other people. Yep. Not just entertainment.
That's right.
Value. I mean, you're connected with a college, and so you got to figure out, you know, because she said the college is not even going to give us as much money this year. I said, okay, well, you can change that. Because if you become indispensable to this college, they'll pay you twice as much. And so there is a lot of power in value, in creating value and proving value. And sometimes you may have, you know, at some point you may have to give that away to show the value and prove the value. But if you prove value in what you're doing, you'll never be without work. You'll have too much work.
Well, you know, it's interesting. In my new world, Andy, as the lieutenant governor, which you never thought I would be a lieutenant governor when we met 20-some years ago, but it's really interesting how so many people come to us in government with funding requests. And they probably do not do as well as they should what you just talked about, which is talking about the value that it will bring. But sometimes they bring influence with them. And so maybe they end up getting funded. And then what's really amazing to me, having grown up with the scoreboard, is
right.
We don't do as good a job keeping track of the value that was gained. But then the next
right.
year they're back for the same. And so just like you're talking to your folks from the PBR station, you know, first of all, you better convince someone of your value, right? And
right.
And then if you are fortunate enough to get some help, that value better be proven out. And
yeah. And so that's true for businesses. That's true for coaching organizations. You know, there are some, as you know, when you go in as a head coach of a major college team, you know, I tell coaches, I say, you've either got 3 years to get this going or 5 years, one or the other. And they'll say, well, what does that mean? And I say, well, you got 3 years to get it going if they don't like you. If they like you,
yep.
You got 5 years.
Yep.
You know, I mean, if you got a great relationship with the press, great relationship with the alumni, great relationship with the players, if you know, and there's got to be a balance of that liking you and that proof. That proof,
yep.
of course, with college football is winning.
Yep.
And that's you know, we use the term winning in different ways in business, but it means the same thing.
Well, there's no question. And what I found after coaching 38 years is we had to win on the scoreboard, but the winning that I look back on now is we were talking off camera before we started here today. We just had 97 players over to the governor's house. And watching those kids and what they've become, I know we've won, but you can't keep a job on the things that you're building in kids necessarily. You better win some games, right?
Yeah.
Better get some
yeah.
proof.
And, you know, I use you a lot when I talk to groups, when I talk to coaches at whatever level, because, and I'm, you know, I've said this a million times. I've just never said it to you. So I'm not just saying it for this show, but I look at you, and even years ago, I knew this was true. I tell people Jim Tressel is the one coach that I have ever worked with that could have done anything. He's the one guy that I've ever worked. He could have been president of the United States. He could have been CEO of a Fortune 100 company. Could have been a football coach. He could have done anything he wants. And that's because of who you are, not what you know, which is why the governor said, hey, I need you to be lieutenant governor. And this is why you're still in such demand. I mean, I would imagine you have half the college football programs in America calling you. But that's, again, it's because of who you are.
Well, that takes a long time to create with the people that your players or whomever, to create them that genuine understanding of how much you care for them and so forth. There's also that 3 to 5 year period you were talking about that one needs to get that credibility, to get that program going or get that business going or whatever. How did you get the credibility when you wrote the Traveler's Gift to get that trajectory on all you've been able to do to add value to people?
Well, curiously, I didn't have much credibility when I wrote it. I had been a comedian for years. I toured, I don't know if you know this, I toured for 2 years with Joan Rivers, 5 years with Kenny Rogers. And so I learned a lot during that time, but I always remembered my time under the pier, and those 7 things were popping right along with me. So when I wrote that book, I felt like I'd written something worthwhile. Now, of course, when I'm trying to get it published, people are going, "It's not funny." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. It's not supposed to be funny." And so, but the dirty little secret about the Traveler's Gift is I couldn't get it published. And I'm not saying that 10 or 12 publishers turned me down. For 3.5 years, 51 publishers said that what I had written was not worth putting on paper. And so I had written that part about persist without exception in there. I was like, oh gosh. So the final end result of that was I got a publisher the 52nd try, and they published it. I had a 1-book deal. They published 10,000 books, put them in the bookstores. 6 weeks later, none of them sold. They sent them back to the warehouse, and it was over. And they told me, they said, "Yeah, it's over. We're going to put them in remainder stores, and then after that, we'll burn them." I'm like, "Burn them? Really?" And I said, "Can I have them?" They said, "You can buy them."
Wow.
I'm like, seriously? So I started buying what I could afford at the time, and I started giving them away, because I thought there's got to be some value in this. I feel like, God doesn't teach you how to swim just to let you drown. And so I began giving them away. I'd give them away on airplanes, and I'd say, "Hey, this is for your next crisis." And somebody would say, "Well, how do you know I won't have a crisis?" Well, we're all either in a crisis, coming out of a crisis, or headed for a crisis. That's part of being with us on this planet. And they'd kind of chuckle, and I'd say, "Here, read this. I think you'll like it. My wife loves this author." And so people would kind of laugh. And so I gave them away. And somebody gave one that they got to somebody, and somebody gave one to somebody else and somebody else. And finally, it landed with Robin Roberts at Good Morning America. And out of nowhere, the books were headed for the dumpster fire, and Robin started championing that book. Wow. And she made it Good Morning America's Book of the Month. And then 6 months later, Good Morning America named it one of the 5 books you should read in your lifetime. And so I use that, and I look at that, and I think, what is it that you feel led to do? What is it that you feel like is important? Where are you leading your team? Where, what parts of your team need your attention? Because if there's something you feel led to do, get after it. Get after it, and don't, because I think about how many times I was so discouraged along that journey, but I also learned during that time the quality of your answers will be determined by the quality of your questions. Jones told me one time, he said, if you're not getting the answer you want, ask a different question. And I finally figured that the quality of your answers is determined by the quality of your questions. I remember during that time, and I'm talking about questions to yourself, what you're saying to yourself, not just to other people. But I remember during that time, and I really believe that I slowed my progress down by asking bad questions. I would ask questions like, I'd get another rejection. And I think, wow, is this just not as good as you think it is? And then my inner person would say, of course it's not as good as you think it is. I mean, what do we got to do? Hit you over the head? I mean, come on, you're embarrassing yourself sending this out. And that would slow me down. I remember asking the question, is this God's way of telling me I should not be doing this? And, my inner person would say, what do you want him to do? Burn a bush for you? Of course he doesn't want you to do this. And I mean, it was just bad questions. And if you ask bad questions, you're going to get bad answers. So if you can ask a good question that will lead to something, it's like, why am I so fat? That's a bad question. I lost 35 pounds at one point in my life, and asking, why am I so fat? And my inner self is going, well, you eat all the time. You eat at night. You can't stay away from the refrigerator. And your mother was kind of fat, and so you're probably just gonna be fat. I mean, that was what I'm telling myself. But then when I changed that to ask myself a good question, which is, how can I get back to the size that I was when I was in college and not be starving to death and have a good time doing it?
Yep.
Well, now my self began to answer that question. Well, with the traveler's gift, I asked a question one day. It was out of frustration. And I said, is there anybody more powerful than a publisher? Is there anybody more powerful than a publisher? How do you go around these guys? And I just got the answer like that, is that, yes, there is somebody more powerful than a publisher's wife. And when I got, after 51 rejections, when I got the manuscript into a publisher's wife's hands, we had a deal a week later.
The right question.
Yeah, right question.
The one.
And I always think you're not lacking time, you're not lacking money, you're not lacking leadership, you're just lacking an idea. Just one idea.
Well, that's why the traveler's gift with the 7 decisions, why that really resonated the first time I saw it, and I said, this is what our kids need to do for the rest of their lives, and it'll help this season. It'll help us win, but more importantly, this is going to help them the rest of their lives. And because we had talked a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 years earlier, with John Maxwell in one of his books, and he talked about the people who reach their potential decide early what the answer they want to be, and then they manage the heck out of that and do the things that it takes to do that. And so our guys had a little handle on that, but when then they got the 7 decisions, and probably the most exciting question I remember you talking about in one of your books, and I think it was the Bottom of the Pool book, when you're talking about after Bob Beamon made the long, world record long jump in 68, 2 feet longer than, had ever been jumped. And then after that, the wrong question kept him from ever doing it again. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how just that wrong quick, because he had gone past 2 feet. I mean, the record, the long jump record had only been broken 13 times in a century, and the most it had been broken by was 1.5 inches. And all of a sudden, this guy breaks it by 2 feet. Now, there's a little bit to the story, and you can read it in the book, sure, but there's just the story about leading up to the mental state he was in to do that. But then after that, you're right, people began to ask, can he do it again? And the answer that they decided was no. Right.
And yet, the question should have been, will he do it again? Because when you say, can he do it again, and they slam that door shut on him, he's reading this stuff, he's hearing this stuff. No, he can't do it again. No, he can't do it again. And you wish you could go back in time and say, look, that's the wrong question. The question is, will he do it again? Because can he do it again? Absolutely he can. How do we know that? Because he already did.
Right. Yep.
He already did. He already did it. So can he do it again? Yeah, he can. Now, will he? I don't know.
No,
But he can.
the good question for him would have been, when will you do it again? Will you do it again in the World Games, or will you do it again in the trials?
Exactly, exactly. But a mental net is just as tough as a physical one.
We had, staying on the track theme, and long time ago track. So when my dad was at Baldwin Wallace College, a little Division III college in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a little hurdler there. His name was Harrison Dillard. And Harrison Dillard, going into the 48 Olympics, was the #1 ranked hurdler in the world. And his coach was a guy named Eddie Finnegan. And he, at the Olympic trials in 1948, in the hurdles, he fell and didn't make the games. Eddie Finnegan got him signed up to run in the trials in the 100-yard dash. That was back when it was 100 yards. And he ended up winning the Olympic gold medal in the 100-yard dash. Then in 52, he went and won the hurdles in the 52 Olympics and just passed away at age 99. He was the oldest living, fastest human in existence on our planet. But the point of my story is this: Eddie Finnegan had been an assistant coach at Baldwin Wallace and became the head coach then over at what's now Case Western University. It was Western Reserve University back in the day. Well, but he stayed living in our little town, and Western Reserve was only 20 minutes away, and I was his paper boy. And I remember when I was in 5th or 6th grade going into his living room, and at the time he was fighting some cancer. He had been retired and so forth, and he asked me the question. He said, well, are you going to play some sports? Do you like sports, when you go to junior high? And I made the mistake of saying to him, well, I'm going to try to play football, basketball, and baseball. And here was this frail guy fighting cancer. I thought he was going to come up out of his chair saying, you're going to try. You have to decide. You have to decide now. That's the wrong answer to my question. And I'll never forget that, because it kind of fueled me. And then fast forward 40 years, and I'm reading about the 7 decisions. You have to decide.
Yeah.
And that's so critical. And so when the Traveler's Gift took off, I assume that's when you really started building your team, and all the other things have gone from that?
It is. And the team that we have built here, we call the place we work at Wisdom Harbor Studios. Mm-hmm. And that's where we produce wisdomharbor.com that goes into schools and businesses. And this team has been, handpicked. We are a bunch of veterans here. And, as I explain, when somebody comes in, I'll say, look, our culture is the most important part of what we do. You don't know how to use a computer? Yeah, we can teach you how to use a computer. You don't know how to do so and so? We can teach you how to do that. What we can't do is we can't buy you a personality. We can't impose the right thinking on you. And so we hire for culture. Yep. And we build culture. And the business that I have called Creating Measurable Results, mm-hmm. that is that's how we help people compete in ways the competition doesn't know a game is going on. And that can be done in football, it can be done in the boardroom, it can be done in the factory, and we're doing it with tons of different kinds of people. But it's all building a team around the culture. Yep. And it used to bother me, Jim, that I thought, man, I'm going into this work with this company. And I don't really know anything about their industry, but I have found out since that's a benefit. I told Nick Saban one time, he asked me what my experience was. First time we met, asked me what was my experience. I said, football? He said, right. I said, I played in the 6th grade. And he kind of did that. And I said, really? Hurd Elementary Rams, number 25. That was me. And he gave me that Saban look. And I said, I'm just messing with you, Coach. I said, in reality, I don't know a ton about football. I know what fans know. I'm a fan, but I don't know what you know. And I look at you and I think, you're in the conversation for the best of all time. What seminar do you go to? What consultant could you possibly bring in here to help you that would know more than you know? And I said, so you probably want to work with me. He said, really? I said, yeah, because I can help you compete in ways the competition doesn't know a game is going on. Consultants with football are going to help you think just like football.
That's right.
But I'm going to have you thinking in different directions. And so it's amazing to me how fast a great company can double or triple or quadruple when that coaching on culture, I mean, we apply it to the entire company. I mean, we don't just coach the leadership. We coach everybody and, every employee in the whole corporation. And we do it at a price that they can handle, that people can do. But it's an investment in the people, an investment in the culture, and nothing will turn your company around faster. And if you have a great company or a great team or great organization, nothing will put rocket fuel in you more than an emphasis on culture. And it's like we were talking about before we got on the air with the NIL stuff and everything. The culture is even more important.
Hey teammates, I want to tell you about a project we're working on with Youngstown State University. One of the ways Ellen and I have decided to give back is through the Tressel Institute for Leadership and Teamwork. We've collected a set of successful business and nonprofit leaders to serve as guest servant leaders in partnership with the Sokolov Honors College to teach university students teamwork, leadership, and personal skills. We teach from a foundation built on gratitude, excellence, hope, love, and selflessness. If you're a young person or parent helping to search for a unique college experience, you can learn more at tresselinstitute.ysu.edu or ysu.edu. Links will be provided in the show notes. If I had a nickel for every person I've talked to when they've been building their staff or building their team, and have told them, hey, look, don't get mesmerized by the resume. Don't feel as if, they are bringing all this knowledge. You must be convinced of what they will bring to your culture. How because
that takes character.
That's right. That's right.
It's like, it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me how often we get seduced by talent. Mm-hmm. But character will always come to the forefront.
That's right. We used to always
you can draft that guy. You can draft that guy in the first round, but we all know a ton of first round draft choices that failed, and it wasn't because of lack of talent.
Yep. We used to always say about talent, you have to be capable. You have to be capable, but you don't have to be the most talented person. You have to be the person that fits our culture and fits this team and wants the team to succeed well above themselves and all those things. And, people struggle at that. At a university, when I was a president, much larger workforce. You have 1,500 people. We had 12,000 students. It's not in Ohio State or Alabama, but still it's a lot of people, and you don't really know them all. Whereas when I had a coaching staff, there was no one that I hired that I didn't know. I mean, I knew what they were about. I wasn't just aware and knew some facts. I knew where their heart was. I knew how they handled hard things. All of a sudden I get to a university and we have all these search committees and all this and that, and it's all based on their resumes and so forth. And I used to always say, because we were in Youngstown, Ohio, and it's not it's not Miami, Florida, it's not Charlotte, North Carolina. And is that person dying to be here? Are they the type of person that will fall in love with our kids in Youngstown, Ohio? Or are we just mesmerized by one of their research papers, or and it's so and when we get it right, it's amazing, the faculty member or the administrator or whatever, the difference that they make. And when you get it wrong, it can set you back. And it's so. As you were starting a whole new business, how did you find people with the right culture as you were building? Because I know people ask us that question all the time. Where do I find the right people?
Conversations help, and like anytime I go into somebody's office, and I'm sure you do this too, is I look at their books. I see what they're reading and what they have read. They give you an idea of what's in their mind. And I'm always looking for somebody for us. I'm always looking for somebody that thinks differently, because if you're doing what everybody else is doing, you're probably doing something wrong, because everybody is not rocketing out to the forefront. In fact, if you're doing what everybody's doing, you're probably contributing to the average. Even if it's a high average, it's still average. Do you want to be average? Do you want to raise average children? Do you want to have average results in your life? Do you want to live in an average place? No. If I gave you a magic wand, you'd wave it around and say, I want the best, the best, the best, the best. Okay, so if we're going to do that, we're going to have to think differently. It's amazing to me how many people want to make a difference, but they don't want to be different. And so to end up in a different place, there's a thing with teenagers. I ask people a lot of times, what are your teenagers struggling with? What do you see them struggle with more? And it's acceptance, being seen as different.
Right.
And yet, if you ask kids, who is it that you really admire? It'll be Peyton Manning and Michael Jordan and, George Clooney, or people like this. And so those people, the reason you admire them to a degree is because they're very different. They have had different results in their life. And so if you back that up and realize that it at some point, if you're going to end up really different, at some point you have to be comfortable with being different.
Yep.
You have to get comfortable. You have to seek that out. So I'm always looking for people who think differently, not outside the box, beyond the box. I want to get people so far beyond the box that, because everybody's outside the box now. If you ask anybody, we pride ourselves on being outside the box. Really, it sounds like everybody's outside the box. And so we would like to be way out of town, way away from the factory that's building the boxes everybody else is sitting around outside of. And so we want to be beyond the box. And to the essence of culture, the measure of culture is the thinking. It's the thinking. And you can ask some simple questions, to find out, how people think, and to find out what, because it's not a matter of opinion thing. A lot of it's a matter of thinking differently to better conclusions. You mentioned one of the things that Jones told me, and Austin, my oldest son, asked me not too long ago. He said, what is the best advice you've ever gotten? Well, I didn't have to stumble over that one, because I knew. The old man, Jones, gave it to me 30-something years ago, and I didn't understand it when he said it. It went over my head, but it was so odd that I kept unpacking it and just kind of stayed with it for years. And now it has become a cornerstone. With creatingmeasurableresults.com, it is probably the number one thing in my mind working with people, working with clients. I run every decision I make through this piece of wisdom, and here it is. And you mentioned it earlier. It's you can't believe everything you think.
Yep.
And the best way I could explain that is, have you ever known something? I mean, you knew it, you could argue it, and you could win the argument every time. But then 6 months, a year later, you found out, oh, that was not exactly right. Mm-hmm. My information was a little incorrect there. So if you've ever done that in your life, does the possibility exist that something you know right now, does the possibility exist that something you know, your information might be incomplete or incorrect? And you would say, well, Andy, of course something I know might be incorrect. All right, I agree. But the point is, we don't know what that is right now. We don't know how many subjects it may cover. And so there is a thought, a push in American business, in sports. I hear coaches talk about this all the time. I hear parents talk about it all the time. Reaching your potential, reaching your potential, achieving to your potential. And as concerned as we are about that, there is a misconception as to why people don't reach their potential. The misconception is a lot of people believe that the reason they're lagging behind or somebody's lagging behind their potential is there's something they're missing. There's something they don't know, something they're not getting. But that's not true. Because if you think about it, if there's something you don't know, you keep talking, you keep searching, you keep questioning, you keep reading, you keep asking. And so the biggest danger to reaching our potential is not something we don't know. The biggest danger to reaching our potential is what we know for sure. Because at that point, we stop searching, we stop growing in that area, and we move to something else. And we end up in an average arc all across every subject in our life. And so to help people reach more with their teams, there's, I mean, we could talk all day, and you know this, Jim, about the companies that we've helped double and triple, and the college football teams. I mean, how does Georgia State beat Tennessee in Neyland Stadium? How does Appalachian State beat Michigan? And if you look at Troy beating LSU, does anybody think the talent level is anywhere close on that? So it has to do it has to be something with the team. It has to be something with that dynamic, that culture of that team. I tell you a really interesting story. When Georgia State went in the opening weekend to Neyland Stadium to play Tennessee several years ago, it was the opening weekend, and they beat them in front of 113,000 people. And when they beat them, they immediately, like within the hour, rolled out T-shirts that had upset Georgia State over Tennessee. I mean, they had the shirts. They had printed the shirts. And so it turned out that had started back in July when somebody said, when the athletic director said to his assistant, when we beat Tennessee, we need to have some way to celebrate this. So he put his money where his mouth is and had these shirts created and had them there. And so you look at that and you think, is culture something that you can learn? Is something you can really build? Is something you can expect results from? Yeah. How would you think in a million years that athletic director would have any idea that Georgia State could go in and beat Tennessee in Neyland Stadium? Well, it was the same guy who was athletic director of Appalachian State when they beat Michigan.
Wow.
Same guy. So, You can repeat success if you understand where it's coming from. If you can get a hold of a culture with a team, it's more powerful than talent, apparently.
Well, there's no question, and the emotional part. I don't know business at all, but the emotional part.
Yeah, you do.
The emotional part of sport is so critical. Where you are emotionally, what you're thinking, what questions you're at, what affirmations you're saying to yourself, what questions, if you're asking the wrong questions. I'm sure that day in Neyland Stadium, Georgia State was thinking right.
Yeah.
Tennessee was thinking wrong. Because, like you said, the talent, if they were both thinking equally as effectively, well, then the talent, I guess, takes over. But I can go back through my 300 and some games, and I can tell you when we had our team thinking right and we had the culture right versus the times that we didn't do as good a job. And the one thing that you were talking about, when people come up to the conclusion that they know everything, that they think they figured it out, in higher education, here's the one we always heard all the time. Well, the experts say that the best practices are. And I would always think to myself, well, I'm not an academician, but I'd like to have the best games, not the best practices. I want the best results. And, and that whole thing, well, clearly the best practices are such and such. I was in a meeting one time when a vice president said, the data clearly shows that the single most important trait for future success is cognitive ability. And I said, well, man, I'm done. I got no chance. And I started thinking, I said, there's no way. But, you bring up the whole topic of thinking. One thing I've noticed in government, where we have so much to do. In football, we had 100 guys and a dozen coaches and pretty myopic. We had a lot of different things going on, but not like a state. We have 12 million people. We have 8 different cities. We have rural, we have urban, we have rivers, we have lakes, we have roads, we have mental health things, we have foster care, we have bird flu with our poultry group. There's a zillion things. And one of the things that I found that I've got to figure out how to do is, when you're in these kinds of organizations, or you're a CEO of a huge company, you better find time to think how we can do this better, how we can do this best, as opposed to just running from one fire to the next and doing it the same way we've always done it. Boy, you need time to think and read. And sometimes the busier you get, and we tell our viewers on It's All About the Team all the time, take time to read and think and learn.
Yeah. The idea of industry standards or best practices, that is the wavelength most organizations work on. I mean, people are quick to tell you that's how it's done.
Right.
And they're quick to tell you this is not how it's done. Yeah. History tells us it's not done this way, whatever. But best practices, industry standards, that is a great way of staying right in the middle of the pack.
That's right.
Staying right average with everybody, because every company is judging their success on their industry competitors.
Right.
And if they're a little ahead, a little behind, right there, and to a great degree, that is why industry lines up, businesses line up, and they rarely change place in line. There's Home Depot, there's Lowe's, there's McDonald's, there's Burger King, there's Coke, there's Pepsi. And rarely does Avis surge ahead of Hertz. It's because they're all making the same decisions the same way. They're building their people the same way. There's no emphasis on culture that they understand. I mean, you know this from working with people that a lot of CEOs they talk about personal growth kind of because they know they're supposed to. But they don't really understand that if you coach everybody, and that's what I do. I coach. I'm not a trainer.
Yep.
I'm a coach. It's like you. You were not a trainer. You were a coach.
That's right.
Trainer trains that physical thing. Coaching is thinking.
Yep.
It's thinking. You've got these talented guys out in the field, but are they making the right decisions? Are they moving the right way? Are they moving at the right time? And so it's the thinking aspect of it. And so to be able to move that thinking ahead and to be able to move it ahead with everybody in the whole organization, it's a game changer.
Talk about, I know in one of the books, I love the concept of we get caught up in today's society saying, hey, Andy, that was great, and hey, Chris, that was great, and hey, that was great, and that was great. And we settle for great instead of best.
Right.
And talk through that one. That to me, that hit home.
That book, the book Good to Great.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Great book.
Yeah.
Great book. And evidently 5 or 6 million people have read that book. And when I work with a new client, I tell them, I say, have you read the book? And generally they have.
Right.
And I say, okay, for now, we're going to forget that book because your competitors have already read it too. And so we're going to let them go good to great. You're going to go great to best.
Yep.
You're already great, okay? I mean, you're already on a level of great. But best is one thing. It's one thing. You know the best. There can be different categories, but we're not talking about some of the best or the best of the decade. We said the best. That's one. It's like the truth. Something can be true and not be the truth. The truth is the foundation. That's the bottom of the pool. Things can be true and not be the truth. And so the truth, that's one thing. Now, that brings up a curious little conundrum in that if you want to find the truth to the foundation, you can find the truth, whatever truth you're searching for. You can find it, but not really harness it. And you'll never be able to create the best. But if you want to create the best, you can't do it without the truth.
When I read that one, it because I do worry a little bit about, as I've watched the last 50 years now in my professional career, if you will, and the the positive reinforcement and that's great and that's great. And then there were times in my career I was like, gosh, I wonder if I'm not being as encouraging as I should because everyone's saying great and this is great. And I'm thinking, well, we're supposed to get that block, or we were supposed to catch the ball. Yeah. And we got to be thinking about being the best.
Right.
And individually as well. If I'm the best version of myself, the best I've ever done, I'm gonna make the Bob Beamon 29-foot jump, and then I'm gonna make it again because I'm gonna be better than the last time. And so people ask all the time about, have kids changed? And in my mind, they haven't changed as much as parents have.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And I think they want to know the expectations you have for them. And if your expectations are just, oh, great, versus the best, I think you're going to sell them short. But anyway, so we've gone a long time, but I do want to ask one more for you here. So you've worked with some of the great athletic teams and pro sports, college sports, great businesses and so forth. And you don't need to name names or anything, but could you give our viewers an example of how someone really raised their game, whether it was doubled their sales or whatever, and what that took in terms of culture change?
Okay. I mean, I want to give you a business one real quick.
Okay.
Then I'm going to give you a sports one.
Okay.
And both of these are killer stories. The business one is I had been doing the creating measurable results stuff for a little bit. This is about 10 years ago. And I had figured out the power of this doing this culture and helping people compete in a way that their competition didn't know a game was going on. So I happened to be speaking for a company called Fairway Mortgage. It was in Madison, Wisconsin. And they had about 750 employees, had done $5.4 billion in business that year. And I got in a day early and just happened to go to dinner with some of the people. And, I kind of walked around and talked to people and met some people before I spoke. And so the next day, I didn't have to get to the airport quickly. They were tearing everything down. And I happened to run into the CEO, a guy named Steve Jacobson. And we were just talking. And I said, man, you have some great people. You have great people. And I said, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to double your results in a year. And he said, yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be great? I said, well, I'm serious. He said, well, we did $5.4 billion last year. I said, yeah, I know. And you should be able to double that in a year. He said, well, it took us 19 years to get to 5.4. I said, yeah, I know. And you should be able to do that in a year, double it in a year. And so we talked on the phone, and he flew in. And so I was telling him enough about what we did that he became convinced. And I told him when they signed to do it, we're going to coach everybody. And when he signed to do it, I said, now let me just tell you what some of your vice presidents are going to do. I said, when I'm in the room, they're going to be real happy. But when I leave the room, they're going to say to you, hey, Andy's a great guy. We really like him. But, he doesn't really know anything about this business. And history doesn't support anybody doubling, and so I think you're setting people up for a big fall if we do that. And I said, Steve, if you can hear that and smile and nod and keep going, I said, we'll double this thing. Well, long story short, at the end of the year, they doubled it, 11.2. I didn't mean to call it that close.
Right.
11.2 billion. Next year did 17.6 billion. Next year, 22 billion. After 7 years, they've done 72.5 billion, had 11,000 employees up from 750.
Whoa.
And the thing is, we did, I don't know anything about the mortgage business. I don't know anything about the numbers. I don't know anything about the sales process. All I know is about the people and the culture. And to get into them, the culture is the thinking. And when you raise the level of thinking of 11,000 people, it just makes sense. Better people get better results. And everybody says, I've heard people say, everything rises and falls on leadership. I don't believe that. Leadership is only 10% of your people.
Right.
Everything rises and falls on 10% of your people? I don't think so. Now, everything rises and falls on culture, because that's 100% of your people. Yep. And so the idea of the thinking and to get these guys into a place where they were able to put what I call put the whole team on the field. And that is, you got in football, you got 11 starters, but you got a lot of people on the sidelines. Right. And I would watch those guys and I would think, I wonder what they're thinking. When they watch this game, I wonder. And so I'm imagining these guys thinking, wow, I hope they play good today so I can get my national championship ring. I hope they play good today so coach doesn't kill us in practice on Monday. But they don't feel like they can really do anything. They're on the sidelines. And so in companies, you got the sales team, and that's about 11 guys out of 100. And you got the sales team, but I imagine all the accounting, the legal, the IT, the reception, all those people, the clerking, all those people are on the sidelines probably looking at, I hope they sell something so I can keep my job. I hope they sell something so I get my bonus. But they don't feel like they have any part in it. But if you build a culture with your organization to where everybody away from work is pushing just because of who they are, because of where they are, you will get a company that ends up like Fairway Mortgage. Fairway Mortgage is the number 4 mortgage originator in America right now. If you took the top 10 mortgage originators and added their advertising budgets together, divide by 10, the average is over $500 million in advertising a year. Now that's 1.2 billion for Bank of America, down to 100 million for Navy Federal Credit Union. Fairway's at number 4. You know what their advertising budget is? Zero. Zero. Because they've got 50 states, offices all over these states, and their people are all bringing in business. Yep. They don't have to advertise. They don't have to. Now, so you look at that culture and that shift and that change, and then John Sherholtz, the general manager of the Braves, is a friend of mine for a number of years, and called me one day and said, I've got a guy who's general manager of the Royals, and he's having a tough time, and would you talk to him on the phone? So I said, sure. And so we worked out a time, get on the phone, and he told me, I remember he said, these guys are killing me. You know, I don't know what's going to happen here. And I didn't really understand what he meant, but then he explained, he said, we've been horrible forever. And I've only been here 2 years, and they've been horrible forever. But because of being horrible forever, we have a team full of first-round draft choices. We've got people that they're incredible. And yet there'll be a 3-week period my shortstop can't catch. And then a 2-week period that the second baseman can't throw to first. And then for 3 weeks my home run hitter can't hit the ball. And he said, I'm at my wit's end. And I said, Dayton, I think culture is your answer. I think culture is your problem, and I think culture is your answer. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I really believe if you get a hold of these guys' personal lives, you will see an amazing turnaround. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, these guys are mostly young guys, right? Mostly. Yep. I said, so they're new daddies, they're new husbands, they're new millionaires, and their families are new to having somebody in the family who's a millionaire. I said, there's tons of pressures on these guys that don't have anything to do with baseball. And baseball is a mental sport. Yep. And, you know, if your shortstop, if the ball hits the glove here, you know, then he'll take it and throw to first, the guy's out. But if it hits it here, it caroms off his glove and it's in left field, and the guy who was supposed to be out at first is now in scoring position at second base. And you know, your guy who's hitting the home runs, if he hits the ball here, it's over the fence. If he hits it here, it's just a long out to the warning track. It's a mental thing. They're not even aware of that lack of concentration or concentration, but it's a mental thing. And he said, I have a hard time with that. And I said, well, did you play Major League Baseball? He said, I did not. I said, okay, so you married, got kids? He said, right. I said, okay, so your job, your work, your performance is generally on the phone or in meetings with other executives, right? He said, right. I said, so you have a fight with your wife. Do you do your best work? Well, probably not. So one of your kids having a problem.
Yep.
Do you do your best work? Probably not. Yeah, probably not, because we can only be as happy as our unhappiest child. And so I said, if you get a hold of this, this culture aspect of helping these people with their, it looks like it has nothing to do with baseball, but it actually is the foundation of it. If you ask the American public, what's the most important thing in your life? Nobody says my career. I don't care what their career is. Nobody says my career. If they have a spiritual life, they'll say God. And what's second? Family. If they don't have a spiritual life, they'll say family. And so how would we expect somebody to pay the right attention, the right amount of attention to the second or third most important thing in their life if the first or second most important thing in their life is in disarray?
Yep.
And I asked him a question. This is one more little thing. I asked him a question. I said, and I knew the answer to this because I had heard John Sherholtz talk about it. I said, who is it that general managers in baseball think is the best ball player of all time? He said, Ty Cobb. I said, right. I knew you were going to say that. I said, now, why do you guys think Ty Cobb was the best player of all time? He said, no slumps. I said, that's right. I said, so you can't look at film and help your guys hit or catch, right? He said, right. I said, well, you couldn't look at film and tell why Ty Cobb was so good either. You could not look at film. I said, but you can read a biography of the guy and you tell exactly why he was so good. He was a sociopath. He was a total jerk. He was married several times, didn't have anything to do with his kids, anything. He didn't like anybody. Nobody liked him. He had one focus. It was baseball because he was a sociopath. And I said, buddy, if you can field a team of sociopaths every year, you'll go to the World Series. But right now, the New York Yankees pay their pitching staff more than you can pay your entire team. You have no alternative but to compete with culture. And so that year, I mean, not my fault, but that year they won the World Series. Wow. And before they got off the field, I got a text that said competing with culture.
Wow. And they do a great job. In fact, one of our old YSU baseball players is on that general manager staff.
Wow.
And he talks about that time, but you really hit it on the head when you're talking about what's going on in those kids' lives, those players, those Major League Baseball players. Not only do you have to know what's going on in their lives, and we talk about it on many of our episodes, they have to know you care about what's going on in their lives.
Right.
And you can't fake culture. It has to be true culture.
Yeah.
And true culture wins all the time.
It does.
Yep.
It does.
Yep.
And you understood that. I've got here in my studio, I see a picture of you right over there in my studio, and I've got your playbook from that year that we worked together with the Traveler's Gift and all like that. And, going through all that big, wide thing, man, it just screams culture. You guys were number one. Your number one thing was culture.
That's right.
And it's also Nick Saban. It was his number one thing. And when he was gone, you could see the difference in the culture.
Yep. Well, still on my bucket list is to get down to the Orange Beach, to the Wisdom Harbor and all that. And I promise you I'll get there. I got derailed a little bit with this Lieutenant Governor stuff. But sometimes you have to serve. But I promise you, I'm going to get down there. I can't wait. You've made such a difference in my life and my players' lives. And if I've told one person, I've told 1 million people about your various books. And because you are who you get to be around, and this has been a blessing to be around you for this hour. But you also, I couldn't be around John Wooden all the time. I got to meet him once, but I got to read every thought he had. And, it was a blessing. And I can't thank you enough. And keep making a difference in people's lives.
Buddy, thank you so much. We're AndyAndrews.com and CreatingMeasurableResults.com. And appreciate you. Say hey to Ellen.
I will do. And get this one, folks. If you really want to make a difference, if you want to play in a different game, and then people even know you're playing in, if you want to start from the bottom, the truth, this is a good one. I've read this many, many times, but still, I got to tell you, Andy, this is still my favorite.
I'm glad.
This is still my favorite. In fact, I just got, for my little 10-year-old grandson, I just got this one, The Young Traveler's Gift, because he's a pretty good little athlete now, and great student, but I got to make sure that he knows the things that are really important.
Absolutely.
So,
hey, your other favorite book there, The Heartmender?
Oh, yeah.
They're making a movie out of that.
Are they really?
Yeah, yeah.
I just sent this one to my daughter, who's an English major, and in fact, someday I want you to meet her because she wants to. You've had on your Wisdom Harbor, I've watched a couple. You had some creative writers talking about.
Yeah.
And so I told her someday, Carly, after you get done raising your kids and you're busy going to baseball games and gymnastics meets and all that, I said, I'm taking you down to Orange Beach because I want you to meet Andy Andrews. So
I would love to meet her.
Lot.
Hey, and by the way, next Wednesday, the content barge from wisdomharbor.com is going to have a piece on math, arithmetic, and sports and how they interact. So you will get a kick out of that one.
Well, I don't want to belong our thing here, but whenever I was recruiting a quarterback, I always liked to look at their geometry grades because of those theorems. If this, then this. Well, that's all playing quarterback. If they're in this coverage, or if the safety's dropping down, or if they, whatever. And I always wanted to see that geometry. They didn't have to love math. I liked it better when they did because math is hard, and I like people that like hard things. But just that natural ability for that math and that quarterback. So I can't wait to see that one. And anyway, we could talk forever. God bless you. I appreciate you. And teammates, until the next time, it's all about the team.